Hi there, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Cloud-Based Mayhem. Got a special one for you today. You've probably seen in the news just recently about Project 100 by Ariel Zlatkovski. He is a Alaska-based pilot originally and has been chasing it probably harder than anyone in the history of the sport. In the last 5 years, he's racked up in his first 5 years of flying, he racked up 2,500 hours, and that's documented and all uploaded to XContest. And then this last year, decided to try for 100K flights. So part of that 100K club that used to be called the Chocolate Bar on XContest. He chased it pretty hard in the 23-24 season and was beaten out just at the end by Matthew Fittis, who we have had on the show about a year ago. Matt that year got 52 flights, just snuck them out. And so Ariel decided this year to go for 100. It's 100K flights. In doing so, which he just finished at the end of September, he got 11,400K of flying, almost 400 flights total, 3 different wings, the Peak 6, the Climber 2, and the Arctic R, and got almost 900 hours in the air. So about 10% of his year, just in total, was spent off the ground. Certainly a record, incredibly remarkable. On the face of it, sounds pretty amazing and epic, and what a fabulous year, but there's obviously some dark sides to chasing numbers like that, and some loneliness, and just constantly being away. And so he gets into all of that, which I really appreciated. Very honest about some of the harder things of this mission. A couple accidents sounded pretty scary. Both involved power lines. In some ways, cheap mistakes, which we always like those. But a lot of really cool stuff here. And what a mission. Just truly incredible. I don't think anyone has ever flown those kind of hours in a season. So I loved talking to Ariel about all of this. Pretty phenomenal. I think you'll enjoy it as well. Before we go here on the show, just a reminder about the subscriber content. A lot of folks are having trouble accessing that, and that has to do with a glitch on our side that I'm having to fix manually. So if you're having any trouble accessing the subscriber content, just send me an email and I'll fix it up for you. It only takes a few seconds. You are a subscriber if you have donated to the show, if you support it in any way, if you bought swag or the book or anything, or you've just let me know that you can't support it financially. We will never put anything behind a paywall, and I'll give you a lifetime subscription. This content has always been free and without any advertisements. It will always be free, but if you can support the show, we really appreciate it. There's lots of cost here, lots of time, and but I love bringing it to you, and I loved hearing this story and love bringing you this one as well. So enjoy. Cheers. Ariel, welcome to the Mayhem. This has been a long time coming, but I think we got our timing right because you've just polished. XC Mag just put something out, so I'm not going to be the first news on this, but congratulations on your project, which we'll get into here, and welcome to the show. We're literally on the other sides of the world from one another. You're in Beer.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm in Beer right now, and I feel like in the past I've always heard you say, this has been months in the making, and we got together really, really quickly. So happy to be here.
Yeah, no, thanks for making it happen. When I heard you were in Beer, I thought, oh man, that's not going to happen. We don't have, but so far so good. The internet's good, and it's nice to see your smiling face. It's kind of phenomenal for me to know you just sent me all these stats with XC Mag, put some of this out. We'll get into this in a bit, but I can't believe that you've just done this and you're in Beer to chase more. You are something, man. Holy cow.
Yeah, well, I flew all of last year very intensively, and the best place to be in October, November is Beer, so I decided to come here, but fly probably less intensively. I'm also going to spend some time this month writing an article for XC Mag, and I'm just going to fly whatever feels fun for the day rather than specifically chasing distance every single day. So it's a little bit of an artist retreat this month, we'll call it.
Before we jump into the project, let's dive back Yeah, in the first 5 years, and these are all we were just talking when we were offline before we started recording. These are logged. These are in XContest. These are logged hours. 2,500 hours in the first 5 years of your flying, which is really phenomenal. That's like Tio DeBlick type hours. The only person I've ever known that's maybe gotten close to this in terms of XC hours this last year you did, which was almost 1,000, right? Is Antoine Gerard. He claimed he did over 800 the first couple years, which is just insane. I mean, it's 10% of your time on Earth you're flying around. Pretty remarkable. But let's rewind the clock. How'd you get into this? Where'd you start? Where'd you learn? And why have you gotten so mad about it? And by mad, I mean mad keen.
Yeah. So I started flying in the spring of 2019. I had seen paragliders growing up in Alaska, and just when I was a kid. And later, when I was 20-something, I was living in the Seattle, Washington area. I saw paragliders again on a hike one day at Poo-Poo Point, Tiger, where I think you started flying as well. And saw it, was kind of interested, didn't really do anything about it, but I definitely wanted to try at some point. And the next year in 2015, everything came together: time, money, interest. Basically, my brother had invited me to go on a pack rafting trip in Costa Rica. That was his big hobby, and I would do it with him occasionally. So we went pack rafting. I paid an absurd amount of money to do this 1-week trip, and realized right after I paid that that's not the thing I really wanted to do. So I went on the trip with him, but I told him afterwards, okay, we come back and I want to try paragliding and spend my money on that. And he said, I don't know why you're upset at me. You were the one who decided to go on the pack rafting trip, but that sounds fun. I'll try it with you. So we started at a school called Ariel Paragliding, which is a bit ironic because my name is pronounced Ariel. And that's in central Washington near the Leavenworth area. It's also known as the Ranch. We went out there in, I believe, May of 2019 for a 2-day intro lesson. Of course, we loved it immediately and signed up for the whole P2 course. And we completed that separately over the rest of the summer. I did the rest of my P2 very quickly in June. I just basically went and lived at the ranch until I was done. And my brother did it a little bit slower because he had a normal job and normal life. And then I started flying pretty much immediately after that. I converted my life around paragliding. I asked my job if I could go remote, and I thought they would say no, and I would just quit and travel and paraglide for a bit. But to my great surprise, they said yes. And so I became a digital nomad, basically, and started flying all around the world all the time. My hours, the first year when you're a new pilot, you're bombing out a lot. You're getting short flights, so it wasn't anything crazy. But by second and third year of flying, I was flying a couple hundred hours a year. And yeah, I had one calendar year that was just over 800 hours. And then this last XContest season, when I was working on my Project 100, which is what we're going to talk about, I got just under 900 hours. It was 893 logged hours, most of which were XC flying. Was that
24?
So I was just really into that was the XContest 2025 season. So from October 1st, 2024 until September 30th, 2025, just a couple of days ago, that XContest year, those 12 months had 893 hours. So I have a lot of, I track all my hours very, very specifically in a big spreadsheet. I like that sort of thing. And so I do have my calendar year hours. But then for this project, since it was based around the XContest season, I also had a kind of XContest season hour count. So it was just from the very start, I really liked paragliding and I converted my life around it. So I ended up with a lot of hours and a lot of experience really quickly.
How old are you?
I'm 32. I started flying when I was 25, almost 26.
And what was your background sport-wise before?
None specifically.
Now you don't have time for anything else. Obviously, all you're doing is paragliding. So what did you do before that?
For sure. So I grew up in Alaska, so just generally hiking around I did a lot of, and I did cross-country running and skiing back when I was in high school. And so I'd say I was always kind of generally fit and outdoorsy, but I wasn't doing anything on any specific high level sport-wise. The big hobby before paragliding was rock climbing, mostly in the gym. I had spent probably 4 or 5 years climbing quite a lot in the gym, a couple times a week. Really enjoyed it. And I was just getting into outdoor climbing with a friend. I went to Squamish and climbed the Chief. It was really cool. I was all set to buy a trad rack and become an outdoor climber. And then I took my first paragliding lesson and immediately that went, that went away.
Will Gadd has always said that when he sees people come to this sport from things like climbing, so non-flow sports, non-gravity sports. So, if you're coming from it from kayaking or skateboarding or skiing, it really makes sense to him. When you're coming from climbing, Cedar, a lot of people have come into this sport from climbing, but it's not really a flow sport. It's a mental flow sport, but it's not a gravity flow sport. Was it hard for you to pick up, or was it pretty obvious and easy?
Flow is an interesting thing because I don't know that I've ever gotten into flow state with paragliding, which I'm happy to talk about later. But I didn't see myself as a climber. That was a hobby that I had after work, a couple times a week, sort of thing. Paragliding wasn't particularly difficult for me to pick up, especially because I then devoted so much time to it that it just became natural for me. But I can't say it was particularly difficult or easy. I did it. I got better at it. I'm now at a certain skill level. It feels very natural. But I will say that when you fly so many hours, it just becomes totally normal life. Like while I'm flying, I have sent work emails. I've called people. I've looked at news and Facebook and things because there's just so much time in the air that, I don't know, my mind checks out on the flying, especially if it's easy flying. And so maybe that's a different version of flow when you're so distracted, you're almost back into flow. But right. I don't really think about that sort of thing. I just go flying and I do whatever happens while I'm flying.
Well, what is your job? How do you? We talked about it a little bit before we went, but you're traveling constantly, you're flying constantly. How are you funding all this?
Yeah, so I had been working already for a few years before I started paragliding. I was working for a really small marketing consulting company, doing some stuff for a marketing team at a big tech company. I was doing some financial analysis on various marketing incentive programs and other administrative things for this marketing team. And that continued after I started paragliding for about 6 years worth. That job actually just ended earlier this year. So right now I am not working, but I was investing all of that time in savings. So it's not an immediate financial issue right now. But for the last 10 years, I was working the whole time, and my entire paragliding career, I was working, and that's how I was supporting myself. And I pretty much gave up all of my roots in the Seattle area. I gave up my lease as soon as I started paragliding. And so my life expenses were really whatever travel expenses I had, the hotels or Airbnbs in various paragliding hotspots and restaurants and whatever else. It was just, that's how I lived, and that's how I continue to live now. It's a complete paragliding lifestyle.
You kind of went toe to toe with Matt, who was on the show. I recorded with him a year ago down at the Red Rocks Wide Open, which he came out and competed in, and you guys were kind of battling a little bit, as I recall, for the most 100 flights in a season. I don't think this concept of 100 in a year was birthed yet. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, but and then he got you at the end, right?
That's right. So in the 2023 XContest season, he had his goal, which was 52, one per week, not actually one every week, but over the course of the year, averaging one a week. And that's right around when I found out about Club 100K. And I thought that was pretty cool. And I thought maybe the next year I could win. So I started trying to fly as many 100Ks as I could. And it was going really well. That was in the 2024 XContest season until the summer of 2024. I'd been far ahead because of India and Colombia, but then the end of the summer in the Alps where I was just not good. And meanwhile, Matthew came to the US and was flying big tasks in Utah and I think something in California as well. And right at the end, I think between when you recorded your podcast with him about his 52 project, between that recording and when the episode went live, he passed me right at the end of the season. I actually ran to beer in late September of 2024, hoping that I'd be able to get some 100K flights in at the preseason of the beer season. And unfortunately, it didn't turn on early enough to do that. So he beat me right at the end. And that was, to some degree, that was part of the impetus of my Project 100, because this is a little bit petty, but he had 52 one year, 48 the next. Together, those make 100. And so that was one of the reasons that my goal was set as 100, is I thought that was a little bit of a cheeky number to get. I had some other reasons as well. We'll get into that. But yeah, a fun little competition with Matthew, who I'm friends with, by the way. I'm like, we Volbived last year. He's got some great photos of me from a really cool flight that we did. That was kind of fun, and a little bit of the backstory of the genesis of the project.
And I don't know if you know this is kind of predating you by quite a bit, but my Alps supporter, the first two of my campaigns, a guy named Bruce Marks, he's unfortunately no longer with us, but he chased the we used to call it the chocolate bar.
Right.
Was that around when you first started? I mean, you used to get, if you got the most 100K flights on XContest, they'd send you a box of Swiss chocolate. Big thing of Swiss chocolate. It was sponsored by a Swiss chocolate brand. And he got that 2 years running. And I think his numbers were somewhere in the kind of the mid 40s. So, you have crushed that, you and Matt both. But what, now you don't even get chocolate. So why do this? What's the, why do, that's a massive dedication of time.
Yeah. So let's just
feather that into your route too. Feather that into how you decided, okay, you're obviously a math person. You kind of had this figured out. You weren't just throwing a dart at the wall. You were, okay, this has to be planned out. There's only so many days you get where you can fly 100K.
Right. So let's just define it. My project, I called it Project 100. And the idea was to have 100 unique days in the XContest season flying 100-kilometer or more route. And I had already been doing this XC circuit around the world. You go to Beer, you go to Colombia, Alps in the summer, or North America, something in the Northern Hemisphere. So I already had experience with going around the world chasing XC because, as I said, that's the lifestyle. So when I got clued into Club 100K, which is this XContest page that ranks people by the number of 100K or higher flights they have, with some calculation asterisks about that, I was kind of interested in that because I do like numbers and it just seemed kind of fun to chase that. And I had this idea that maybe I could do 100 of them for a couple different reasons. One, the thing I mentioned, Matthew's 52, that was the previous.
52.
Yeah, so 52 was the previous highest, at least according to XContest, number of 100Ks flown in a year. So that was one reason. Another reason is that it's just a nice round number. 100 times 100 is 10,000 kilometers. So that's 1/4 of the circumference of the Earth, which is about 40,000 kilometers. I thought that was kind of neat. It's also really easy with percentages. If the goal is 100 and you're at 72, you can say you're 72% of the way done. If the goal is 52, for example, or 80 or some other number, then
not
it's
nearly as clean.
It's not as clean. So it was a really nice number to chase. More broadly, the reason I wanted to focus on doing as many as possible is that my flying style is very impulsive. I do a lot of low valley crossings. I leave climbs before I should. And I thought that it would give me some discipline, that if I'm 2 hours into a flight and I'm about to make some boneheaded move, which I do a lot, maybe if I have this overarching goal in my head that, hey, I need to be in the air at the 4-hour mark and not bomb out 5 minutes from now so that I can get my 100K for the day, which is 1/100th of what I need to do for the year, that maybe that sort of goal would give me more discipline in my flying. Spoiler alert, it did not do that whatsoever. And we'll talk about some interesting flying stories. Yeah, I thought it was going to just be a complete paradigm shift for me and that having that goal was going to change how I fly for the better in terms of safety margin and staying in the air longer. I made tons of stupid decisions. I ended up bombing out and having all sorts of wild retrieve stories or relaunch stories. And so it kind of failed in that regard. It also failed in a different way, which is that the hope was to have 100 days of really nice flying. Because if you go to India, you fly almost every day for the season, like October, November, almost guaranteed. If you go to Colombia, you generally fly most days there. Though this year, Colombia was not that good. And then, of course, the Alps are different. That's more normal mountain weather and not like a India or Colombia style place. But the idea was to have 100 days of nice flying. And it was anything but that because 100 is a lot. And when you're in the Alps and the weather is bad for a week and then you get a day of good weather and then a day of marginal weather, but it's maybe 100K, you go fly it. And so I ended up having so many flights that were either not enjoyable or straight up scary that I just did because it was going to help the project, but I probably otherwise wouldn't have flown. So I would say that in the 100 flights, there were probably about 10 that were amazing, spectacular, really, really great. Probably 10 or so that were somewhere in that negative range between unreasonable and scary or just not very nice. And then about 80 were, we'll call it filler, which is a strange word to use for a paragliding flight where, you're in the air for 4 or 5 hours, which for most people would be this incredible thing. And you're like, oh yeah, I had 80 that are just kind of meh. So in the last couple of days in preparation for this, I've looked at every single XContest flight I have uploaded, which is 367, I believe. 391 on the XContest for the year, of which 100 meet the 100K criteria and almost 300 don't. I looked at every single one and I remember all of those flights. When I look at them, I can go, okay, yeah, I remember making that move and then that flight and then I landed there and had such and such retrieve experience. But I wouldn't be able to name all 100 flights off the top of my head without doing that because there's just so many that it becomes essentially filler. So that I'd say it was the proportion. 10 really good, 10 really bad or somewhere close to, and 80 that were about filler. And so the aim of the project was to have 100 amazing days of flying, and it didn't really end up being that way. It became a lot more of an endurance project than an enjoyment passion project. It was more about slogging through, flying in whatever conditions the day had to get whatever permutation of 100K triangle or zigzag or whatever there was. And so it really was just about persevering through for a whole year of flying rather than enjoying a whole year of flying, which I totally did not expect at the start. And if I had known that, I probably wouldn't have taken it on. But that is the reality, that flying for the whole year, full time, very intensively, was really difficult. And I'm glad that I was able to accomplish the goal, but it did not come without its share of scary moments and strife and sacrifice and a lot of negative things as well. So it was a wild year.
When I read about it and you contacted me about it, I knew right after you had done this, the on paper, which I've got right in front of me, it just sounds so amazing. But when I started thinking about it, I thought, man, I bet that's lonely, scary at times. Like you said, there must have been a lot of times where you're just driven by the numbers. And we talk about how risky that is all the time. There's a dark side of XContest that has turned all of us into number chasers, and which is really fun, but you've got to make sure you keep that balance, right? You're walking a tightrope there.
Yeah, so there is definitely a dark side to chasing the numbers. And there were definitely days that I went flying because I needed a +1 for my 100K count. I had a spreadsheet going with number of days remaining and number of 100Ks remaining. And if it wasn't actively raining or storming, I was out there trying to do 100K every possible flyable day. And there were days that I was tired or I was just not feeling it or the conditions were unpleasant, but I would keep flying or start flying and then keep flying because I felt like it was a duty to myself and to the numbers to try as much as I possibly could, especially later in the summer when the numbers started looking pretty dicey on a proportional level. Like I had to take every opportunity I could to fly.
Did I imagine, that sounds a little scary at times, but it's also really good training. One of the things I always talk about that's so special about the Alps is you end up taking these flights that you would never normally take because you're out there and you're trying to go, and some of them are beautiful and some of them not so much, but I imagine it's fantastic training to fly on these really marginal days and try to eke out 100K.
There were definitely days that I would describe as what you call non-recreational days when you talk about the Alps, and there were days that people were not flying, or maybe they were doing a short local flight kind of in the area. And then I was figuring out how to punch out of some area to get the bigger distance. And it was not recreational, training wise. I don't know that I needed to go get my butt kicked by a lot of really strong days or weird wind situations or whatever. But, in 893 hours of flying over the course of the year, I definitely had my fair share of different trying experiences in difficult conditions that probably made me a better pilot to some degree or gave me some experience I didn't already have.
Any big setbacks, any accidents, any injuries?
So there were a lot of risky moments or scary moments between wind or terrain related things. I did have 2 incidents during the year, and I'll I can summarize them briefly. So one was in Colombia. I was about 60K into a flight and I got low. I was soaring around this ridge, and in front of me, I could see a power line that was over a ridge that stuck out in front of me. There was basically this finger on the ridge I was on, and I needed to either go over the power line and over the ridge or loop all the way around it. And from afar, from we'll call it 100 meters away, 300 feet, I couldn't tell whether I had the height to clear the ridge and the power line or not. So I kept going to get closer and figured that I could just turn away later if needed. Got closer, still couldn't tell. Got even closer, still couldn't tell. From about 10 meters away, I still couldn't tell whether I was going to clear this power line or not. If the power line hadn't been there, it's 10 meters, or if it's 10 feet off the ground, if the power line hadn't been there, I would have gone right over the ground and it would have been no big deal. But I needed to also clear the power line. And at the last moment, I still couldn't tell whether I would or would not clear it. So I swerved away and got a little bit of lee side. I think the same thing that made me not be able to tell whether I was going to clear the ridgeline also made the turn be kind of a very sluggish, sinky turn. And I careened right into a tree, the very top of a tree that was off the side of this ridgeline that I had to curve around. And there's a video of this that the neighbors took, this beautiful mushy turn, and I disappear right into the top of the tree. If I had just been a meter higher, I would have cleared it and then kept flying. But as it was, I went straight into the tree. The glider went over the top of the tree. I was totally fine. Within about a minute, the people that lived at that place came out because they heard their tree exploding. And I hooked myself into the tree with a sling I had. Then this guy lowered me down on a rope and spent about an hour chopping my glider out of the tree. There was a little bit of glider damage. I took a day off of flying, but all in all, it was about as good as it can get. And then ironically,
still hurt.
A little bit, yeah. And that day would have been 100K. So the conditions were good. There was nothing inherently not 100K about that day. So I was also bummed that I didn't get a +1 that day. We'll talk more about the numbers later, but I was keeping track of my almost 100K days or days that could have been 100K if I didn't make some sort of mistake. We'll go with that was a mistake. And then ironically, because that one I hit a tree avoiding a power line, I did have a little run-in with power lines in the summer in Switzerland. I don't want to go into the details too much, but essentially I made a bad judgment call assessing clearance over power lines when launching. This was not a 100K day. This was a pleasure flight day, but had to top land in the mountains because couldn't clear a pass that was in my way. So I top landed safely on one side of it and walked through the pass to the other side. And where I chose to relaunch, there were some power lines for a train that actually power the train below. And I ended up encountering the power lines. It was not great. I spent the night in a hospital getting checked out for my heart and some electrical type burns that I had.
Oh, wow. You got hit.
I think it was actually the arc flash between the two lines, not the direct electrical current from what I've gathered talking to some people that work with power lines. But whoa. Yeah, I mean, I hit them. It was not good. And I was released from the hospital after 24 hours. And I went back to flying a couple days later because they said that medically there wasn't anything bad about continuing to fly. I had to take care of some burn wounds, but it was overall also super lucky. But the ironic thing is that wasn't a 100K day. It wasn't like I took some risk to go get a 100K flight that I wouldn't have otherwise taken or something. It was just a bad assessment, bad judgment call from a pretty experienced pilot. Very surprising that it happened. I'm super glad that it wasn't worse. Obviously, I got very lucky to get away from that one.
In a sense, a cheap mistake, sort of.
Yeah.
Tell me about the style of this. I'm imagining, did you get any 100Ks? Did you get 2 in a day ever? I mean, in beer, 100K, cutting a flight at 100K would be in some ways awful. You're on a really good day. So was it just, were you always trying to monitor your energy levels, and so you get the 100K and it's booming and it's really good? Do you just land, or do you always max out the day no matter what? But tell me about the style of this.
Yeah, so I spent a lot of time thinking about the style and the rules of it for myself. So I'm happy to break down all of this because I spent a lot of time preparing and thinking about it before the project started. So first of all, the whole thing was based on the Club 100K page. And Club 100K counts 100Ks flown by open distance, which is 5 points, 4 legs in between. So it doesn't matter if you make a triangle, it calculates the four leg distance of that triangle. So you might have a 105K triangle, but it's actually 110K of open distance because there's 4 legs and it adds a little bit of a zigzag. So what I cared about at the end of every day is my 4-leg distance 100K? For sure, I was trying to fly triangles, and ideally it would be a 100K triangle, but sometimes I had to do zigzags on a ridge 4 times, like 25K out and back, out and back. That would count. Or maybe the triangle is 90K because you just can't go any further in one distance or another, but you can throw in an extra little zigzaggy loop or fly beyond your launch point at the start and loop back on your triangle. I was concerned with 4-leg open distance only. So that was the first kind of thing that I was chasing. I was going to fly for the parameters. And I made a breakdown for myself of how many FAI triangles versus flat versus open distance flights there were. But in reality, for Club 100K, that page does not care because it converts all flights to their open distance number. So I was going for 100 flights that had 100K as the open distance number. So that was the first thing. Doing 2 in one day was not a thing for me personally in my rules for 2 different reasons. And by the way, it can be done. Like Club 100K doesn't care. If your IGC file calculates out to 100K, Club 100K counts it. And Matthew and some other people have done that before where you top land and stop the track and start a new one and fly a second 100K. That's legit. For my rules, it didn't count for 2 reasons. One is that, as I said, I wanted 100 unique days of flying. So I didn't want 70 days of which 30 were good enough that you could fly 100 and then stop and do another 100. I wanted 100 days that were good enough for 100K, which in retrospect also meant that because the weather wasn't good on a lot of days, I ended up having to fly all of those 100 days, whether I wanted to or not. But the other reason is, this is a much bigger topic, I top land to pee. We'll talk about this. But because I do that, I already had this big ethical concern about my flights, because if I fly 40 kilometers and I top land and then I fly the remainder of 100K triangle, let's say, like I fly 40, land, fly another 10 further to the east, and then turn around and come back 50K to launch. That's a 100K triangle, but it's really like a 40K flight and a 60K flight, effectively. So I was focused on having them be routes rather than flights. So I'll use the word interchangeably. I flew 100K. I covered 100K of distance with the paraglider, but it wasn't necessarily a flight of 100 kilometers of distance. It was a route, like a single continuous track log of 100K. And I was very, very diligent about making sure that any top landing stops did not give me any sort of an advantage. In fact, they're usually a disadvantage because I was generally spiraling down, which takes time. I then had to climb back up, which takes time. I was top landing, which has, of course, physical risk in terms of landing in midday thermic conditions in a mountain somewhere, or in Colombia, it could be a banana farm, whatever it is. So there's usually disadvantages.
Yeah, and the time it takes.
And the time, yeah.
Blowing a half an hour. Yeah.
And there were definitely times when I bombed out immediately after relaunching because I had gone from a high position to a low position somewhere that I could top land, and then relaunched and immediately bombed out, or had to spend quite a lot of time to climb back out. So because I do top landings normally as part of my flying, I didn't want there to be this confusion of like flew 40K, top landed to P, flew another 60K, top landed, reset the track, and then flew 100K again with maybe 1 or 2 other top landings. I just decided it's 1 per day. It doesn't matter whether it's 100K, 110, or 200K, which could have been 2 100K flights. It's just going to be 1 XC flight per day, and I'm going for 100 days that have 100K flown in a single continuous route, even if there's a top landing. And I say single continuous route because there were days where I flew more than 100 kilometers, but over 2 very distinct flights. So let's say I fly 30K and then I bomb out at the bottom of a valley. I would, if there was time, like in the Alps when the days are long, I would scramble to get up to some launch, whether it's hitchhiking up to somewhere, taking a gondola, hiking up something, and I would fly again. And maybe the second flight is more than 100K, in which case, great, it counts. And I had multiple days where the second flight of the day, I saved the day, I got 100 on the second one. But let's say that I got the 30K and then I flew again and I got 60K on the second flight. that I got 80K on the second flight. It's not 100, but 30 and 80 make 110. I wouldn't count that because it wasn't a single 100K continuous circuit. So, but of course, on those days, like the total amount of time spent on flying was just as much, often more than a really fast 100K. I still didn't count them. I was very focused on having 100 unique days with 100 continuous kilometers flown, not two separate flights starting at very different launches. But top landing.
But to be continuous, you could do the top landing. So, okay, I'd be remiss to not ask this. Why not just pee in the air?
Yeah, that's a great question, which I've been asking myself for the whole 6 years I've been flying now, and had way too many conversations with friends about. I don't know. Most of my flying,
it's just your thing.
When I started flying, after I got my P2, I went back to Alaska where I'd grown up, and the flying style there is we soar in these mountains, and we don't have that much distance we can cover in the normal part of flying. Your project up there notwithstanding, the normal places where we fly, we don't do that much distance. There's just not infrastructure to do big XC flights. And so we usually fly for an hour or two. We top land somewhere, we hang out. And so then it's just a normal thing to go pee and then go fly again for the evening session or another afternoon lap somewhere. Yeah. And so I just got used to top landing in mountains, and that just became normal for me. And I just never rectified that since. I have tried a P2. This is a super personal thing to be talking about on the podcast, but I tried figuring out the P2 system in Colombia last year in the shower, and it did not go well. And I just kind of threw my hands up and went, you know what? Maybe that's a project for next year. So I've just the places I like to fly.
Yeah, it sucks. I get it. Yeah, it sucks.
The places I like to fly are generally mountainous places with grassy slopes somewhere. Not always, because there's glaciers and rocks, and of course things become difficult. But there's usually places that are nice grassy slopes where you can top land, especially if you're already soaring on some ridge. It's not that hard to touch down and then keep going. And I had a bunch of rules for myself. I was very, very clear that I didn't want there to be any sort of advantage. And the two advantages you could get from top landing are increasing your altitude and some sort of time-based thing. You know, the weather is bad, you top land, and then the weather becomes better. So I had rules for both of those things to make sure that I did not have any advantage. So in terms of gaining altitude, I'm not going to land and hike up 100 meters to get to a higher position. If anything, I was always, generally I was spiraling down. And so I would always try to relaunch from the exact same place where I put down my glider. So land, the glider comes behind me, I pee, I immediately relaunch. That was also just easiest in terms of time. If I had to reset the glider even a tiny little bit higher just because of terrain or how the wind was coming up, let's say I gain a meter. If I had spiraled down, then I considered that altitude to already be mine because I came down to it. So if I need to go up a meter, that's mine. It's kind of like a bouldering competition where you have to establish that you have control over a hold. If I came down to the launch, then any altitude I gain, a meter or two, is mine. But if I was soaring up something and I touched down, and then I had to reset a meter higher, then I would wing over down for that 1 meter so that I didn't have any altitude gained that wasn't from flying, from soaring or thermaling or whatever. And so I was very diligent about making sure that any potential little discrepancy was rectified in how I flew so that I felt good about it for myself. Not even that anyone would call me out about it, but just for myself, I wanted to make sure that I never gained altitude that wasn't from flying. And then in terms of weather, generally when you're flying XC and the conditions are on, this isn't an issue. If the weather was bad, if things were shaded out and I needed to land, it was never I hope, and I'm going to hang out for half an hour and hope it gets better. No, I would relaunch immediately right away. And so
this was the pee. I get it.
Yeah, I basically treated it as everyone else just keeps flying and pees. I land, but it's business only. I'm back in the air usually within 2 minutes, sometimes 5 if I had to reset or wait for some wind or something. But I would say usually I was back in the air within 2 to 3 minutes most times. So that was
you touched on this.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say you touched on this a little bit, but what was the hardest thing about this? Were there many times, one time where you just thought, this is stupid, I'm going to throw in the towel, this is ridiculous?
I would say I thought that nearly continuously.
Really?
So,
wow.
I'll get back to the question you asked about how I planned it, because that kind of ties into it. So the idea was beer at the very start of the season, October, November. then Colombia, which is somewhere in the December to February timeframe, and then the Alps for the rest of it. I wasn't going to really fly in the US for distance flying because it's not as consistent. It's admittedly not as easy to top land places in the US as it is in the Alps, where there's launches everywhere and nice grassy slopes. So I kind of knew it was going to be Beer, Colombia, Alps in some combination of Alps countries. And so beer season went really, really well. When I left after a month and a half here, I had 37. So I was doing really well. Like I had more than a third in a month and a half of being here. It was almost every day. So I was hoping that I was going to get to Colombia and get another 30 something so that I would arrive to Europe with 70, maybe even more
a lot of margin.
Flown. Exactly. Yeah. Because I knew that was going to be the difficult part. But Colombia was not a really good season this year. There were a couple weeks that were normal, flyable every day for big distance, but there were a lot of times of rainy days where it was flyable, but only for a couple hours. People are flying 50, 60K. Maybe you can eke out 100 if you just zigzag enough along the ridge fast enough, but it wasn't normal every single day is booming, easy flying conditions. And so with Colombia, I was there for 3 months, basically the whole limit of the visa and how long you can be there. And I got 22 in that time. So it was almost twice as much time as in beer, but only 2/3 of the number of 100K flights. And so that put me into Europe with 59 rather than the 70 or 80 that I was hoping for. And the season in Europe this year was not that good. There were some days that were really, really good where everyone is going out and getting their 200K, 300K flight. And so, of course,
during the Alps.
Yeah. So it was really easy to get 100K then. But the majority of the season was spent flying in days that did not want to give 100K. And I was basically forcing them to give me 100K. And on those days, there was a lot of despair. Like when you have a week of bad flying weather, there was a lot of despair. Oh my gosh, the numbers just got really bad. Now I'm going to have to do more of them in the remaining time. And so there were lots of times that I wanted to just quit, give it up. I was like, this is a totally arbitrary goal. There's no reason to be doing this. I can go back to Alaska and do some summer flying where it's enjoyable and my favorite place to fly. And instead I'm here flogging 100Ks in bad conditions. And I didn't quit in the end. I really wanted to get it done. That was the thing, is that I really, really wanted it for somewhat nebulous reasons that I'm still trying to comprehend myself, honestly. But I really, really wanted it. I had this extremely high drive to get this done. And so despite all the setbacks and how difficult it was energy-wise and emotionally to handle this, and you mentioned earlier, I was alone most of the time. Like I flew with friends occasionally, but most of the time it was just me working on this thing all by myself. There was a lot of very negative sentiment running around in my brain about this. It was not a walk in the park or a flight in the park by any means, but I really, really wanted it. So I kept going all the time. And because the numbers were
humans are weird.
because the numbers were generally okay, like the whole summer in Europe, I was always proportional. I was doing 8 per month for the 5 months I was there. It was just enough to keep going. Like if it had gotten really bad with the numbers where I was so far behind that it wouldn't be possible realistically, then I probably would have thrown in the towel at some point and been like, I'm going to go do some pleasure flying rather than chasing this specific distance-based goal. But the numbers kept being tantalizingly close or just above the proportional amount they needed to be in my little spreadsheet. And so I felt like I had a duty to myself to keep going, which to some degree is kind of, there's some sunk cost fallacy there. If I'm 60 and then I'm 70 and then I'm 80 in, I always felt like I'm never going to be at the point of having 80 again. I'm not going to do this on another year. So if I'm at 80, I have to try to get to 100 because I'm so close. I'm never going to be here again. And then I'm at 85 and then I'm at 90. And so it always was this feeling of, okay, I'm close enough. I got to keep going. Like I want to see if it's possible. I have to keep trying.
Would you consider doing this again? When you just sit back for a second, because you finished this a couple weeks ago, you're in beer, you're chasing flying already again. You haven't really paused. Was it fun? Was it? I know you're still figuring it out.
Yeah.
A lot of times these things are a little mesmerizing, a little they're a little mysterious for a while, aren't they? I mean, it's what are we doing?
So was it fun, and would I do it again? That's the question.
Yeah,
it was fun, kind of. I think it was overall a positive experience conceptually, in the sense that if it was negative enough that I didn't want to do it anymore, I would have quit, and I didn't. So from that, logically, I arrive at it was better than it was bad. So it had to be at least like 50.1% positive, but there was a lot of negative stuff, as I said, to it. And I would say that the predominant emotional feeling during most of the year was one of negativity, stress, worry. It was not a lot of positive type moments. Even if I'd land with a +1 on my count, it was always like, okay, now I got to do the next one. Exactly.
Right.
So it was fun just over the exact point, I guess, of being in the positive side of things. And that is only based on like cold, hard facts rather than the emotions of it. Would I do it again? No, probably not, because I don't really feel like I need to. And I've talked about this with some friends who are like, probably no one's ever going to do that again. And I was like, yeah, I think that's true, because not only do you have to have the time and resources, which I was fortunate enough to have, but you also have to have the motivation. And I think anyone that would try it would hit the same motivation wall that Matthew described with his project, and the same motivation wall that I hit. And a lot of the people that would have the skills and the time to do it, they're chasing big flights, like 300K. And so they're not going to probably want to fly on a smaller day because they're going for big stuff. And I just don't know that there's a lot of people that would set their mind to something very, very specific like this. And it takes so much motivation to do that there's just not a huge amount of reason to do it.
Talk to me, Ariel, about burnout. You know, why after a year, how many hours did you get?
893.
893 hours.
Yeah.
And you're in beer right now.
Yes.
That just blows my mind, dude. I mean, so how do you maintain this kind of passion, this kind of stoke?
Yeah. So I even have a further breakdown I can give you. Hang on just a second. I wrote this down.
Your brain works differently than mine, by the way.
So 893 hours total. Of that, for the flights that were 100K or more, so those 100 flights were 507 hours. Another 104 hours were on flights that were almost 100K, where I flew for 6 hours and I got 90K or something like that. Or the days that had 2+ flights that equaled more than 100K, but not as one go, like a 30 and an 80.
They didn't count.
So those sorts of like kind of almost flights where I was really trying was 100. So 600 hours roughly on the really true 100K or attempts. And then that leaves a little bit less than 300 hours of small flights, hike and fly sledders, whatever. So that's just a fun little stat fact. So, and then why I'm in beer.
Wait a minute, hold on. Before you keep going, those 300 hours of other stuff, were those you obviously weren't going to get the 100K, but you still just wanted to go fly, or were those you're going for the 100 and
combination
didn't work out at all?
Combination of both.
Okay.
It could be a day that I started and it started raining 2 hours later, so I got 40K. It could be a day that I bombed out after 3 hours, so I wasn't going to call it close to 100K because it was still far enough away that it wasn't. Some days that just were obviously not XC days, but go flying for an hour or two because I enjoy flying, as it turns out. So I would say there is definitely burnout from flying so much. There is too much of a good thing. The reason I'm in beer is, one, because it's the best place to be in October, November. So I figured I can go here and just not fly as much. But if I want to fly, it's here. Whereas in other places, it's not available. A bunch of friends are going to be here or already are here. There's some ideas to do some Volbibs and some more kind of adventure pleasure flying. And also, admittedly, that's just kind of where you go. And I don't know what else to do. And there is a double-edged sword to that. I have the lifestyle where I can paraglide as much as I want, but I also don't have any other lifestyle right now, which is something that this project kind of exposed to me, is that I don't have the non paragliding like ground game that other people talk about that keeps you coming back for something. And I want to work on that. But at the exact moment, like where else do you go other than beer if you've got nothing else to do other than paraglide? Like I'm not working on something else or needing to be somewhere for a job or have some other hobby that is in some location. So it's like, well, the obvious place to go is beer. But I will say that flying just because you have nothing else to do or nowhere else to be is not a particularly pleasant thing to be doing either. Yeah. So that's definitely something I'm conscious of that this project showed me. And I want to do something about it. I'm not sure exactly what form that's going to take. But that is to some degree why I'm in beer right now after flying so much already. But I will say, I am looking forward to this season of flying in beer. Like I have some ideas for things I want to do. So I am excited about some of that.
If you could rack up, what are a couple of things at the top of your mind in terms of risk for you specifically? Is it, I keep thinking maybe complacency. When you fly that much, you get really confident, which is a really good thing. But also, like you said, there are those days where they're just really easy or where you don't really have to pay much attention or you can be listening to music or sending texts and that kind of thing. When you go up the hill each day, what are the things that kind of bring you back to focus? What are the things that make you specifically nervous? Is it the chasing the distance, on the marginal days, or is it something more maybe benign that still gets people?
So I think a couple of different things. One is we talked about intermediate syndrome. Someone has 300 hours. They think they've done all that and they get into trouble because they don't know everything there is to know about paragliding. Once you start getting into the multi-thousands of hours, I think you are closer to not knowing everything about paragliding, but you've handled your glider in so many different circumstances and so many different conditions that there is maybe like an advanced pilot syndrome. Complacency would have something to do with that, where you truly can do a lot of things, but then that introduces a whole new level of situations that you can put yourself into because you actually have the skills to get out of them, but sometimes you get unlucky. So for me specifically, top landing is one of them, like top landing to pee. And sometimes I top land just for fun, but generally it's to pee. That brings in risk factors like top landing in thermic conditions, random places in the mountains. Generally, you're then closer to the idea of forcing it in because you're like, I have to pee and I want to keep going. And of course, forcing a top landing is pretty much the most dangerous part. I would say that having done, I would guess somewhere in the vicinity of 3,000 to 4,000 top landings, I'm not particularly concerned about the techniques of top landing anymore. There's definitely risk to it just in terms of time of day and conditions. But I think generally speaking, in the places that I'm top landing, it's okay, but it definitely is a risk factor. I think the biggest thing for me is margin, because I do tend to fly pretty low, pretty fast. I make some sneaky moves. That's how I enjoy flying, very terrain based. And it's, I think, different from other people who like to get high and glide places. I like soaring places in the mountains and cutting through coals or, barely clearing trees or whatever is something that happens when you fly that way. And sometimes there's two different types of margin. There's safety margin, like clearing something and there's a safety aspect to it. And there's strategic margin in terms of I'm leaving this climb low, and if it doesn't work, I bomb out, but there's a beautiful field to land in. And I've definitely been on the wrong side of both of those types of margin, of safety and of strategic risk. And so I'm conscious of that. I don't know that I've done a huge amount to mitigate it yet. I started to after the two incidents I talked about, but it is something I'm aware of for me personally.
Where do you go from here? You're obviously goal driven. This was a big goal project. What has you excited about this next year of flying, or potentially in 5 years? Do you think that far ahead?
I don't know about that, kind of. So some people have joked, is the next project 200 200s, to which my answer is absolutely not. It's not even 200 100s. So at the exact moment, the goal is to just focus on pleasure flying and flying for fun, whatever fun is for the day, which could certainly be distance, but also some volbib or trying to tag a specific point or flying with some friends. So I want to work more on just whatever feels fun at any given day to do that. But I do like goals. Part of the reason I wanted to do this project is that I felt like my first 5 or 6 years of flying, I was flying a lot of hours, but they were somewhat aimless. Like I was just flying XC and I was making
training.
But I didn't have any specific goal or purpose to it. And here I had something that, okay, all of my flying and all of my focus is going to be channeled into one particular thing that I'm driven to do. And that was nice to a degree. I think that's why I kept going, is that I liked that feeling of I'm accomplishing this goal. And because it's a percentage-based thing with 100, it was really easy to say, I'm 25% of the way done. I'm 76% of the way done. I'm 98% of the way done. So that was really nice. So from here, I'm not sure exactly. 5-year plan-wise, like I would love to work for a paragliding manufacturer. I think as an American, there's some difficulties with that because most of the companies are European. So I don't know the realistic chances of that happening, but I like paragliding a lot. And working in the industry, I think, would be really cool. And doing something with that is, I'm hoping to do something in that direction.
When you got done, I tend to not like finishing things very much. I didn't like finishing Alaska. I didn't like finishing the Rockies Traverse with Will. I mean, on the one hand, there's a real sense of accomplishment, but on the other hand, I like being embedded in these projects because they're clean. You know what you have to do, and I find the rest of life a lot more hazy than that. It's not as clean. Alaska, the mission is to survive. That's a really clean mission. I like these kind of things. I've never liked finishing the Alps. It's just because you've put so much at it. You've thrown so much at it, and it's so intense. And that intensity is lovely to be embedded in that intensity, and then you're done. And I've talked about this a lot. I call it the Alps hangover. But what was this one like? Was this a real sense of accomplishment and oh my God, thank God, or was it kind of a mixed bag?
It was mostly a sense of relief because at the end of August, I was at 97. So I had 3 more to go with September, but then the weather went pretty bad, pretty much all over the Alps. And so I was really freaking out as September started because I was well ahead of the numbers proportionally. Like I needed 8 in September in a proportional way, but I actually only needed 3. But it wasn't good. And I got 1 in northern Italy where I was in Spikboden. So I was at 98. And then everything just went bad for a solid week. There was pretty much no flying. And so I got really worried. And then luckily I ended up in Bassano. And that's where I got number 98 and number 99, which was completely by accident that I ended up there. And both of them were pretty spectacular flights in their own right. The number 98 was a day that did not want to be a 100K day by any means. Cloud base was super low. I did some really, really low valley crossings in the valleys that you have to cross there. Somehow magically made it work. Picked up climbs from the ground when I really needed it at like the 70K mark. And then the last 30K, I actually slowed down, which normally I'm fly very aggressively. But here I was okay. 30K to go. I just top landed to P, so I don't have to worry about time anymore. I need to slow down, top out everything, which is very unlike me, but it was completely shaded in. And I needed to get all the way back to Bassano and beyond launch, basically, to get 100K open distance. It was going to be about a 90K triangle. I just couldn't make the triangle vertices anymore. But again, I'm flying to the specifications. I need 100K over 4 legs. So I'm doing some mental math. I'm like, clicking on things on my track to calculate different legs, how the zigzags would work from a triangle shape. But if you flew 50K from east to west, that's 50K straight line. But over 2 legs of a zigzag, that might be 53. And that 3 kilometers might make the difference for me if it's all shaded and I'm landing at like 97 or something like that. So it was a really interesting last hour and a half of that flight. And in the end, I was able to go past the LZ area and just glide as far as I could. And I think I got 105 or so. And I just had this really, really cool line under the shade. That was number 98. And then, that was number 99. And then the last flight we should talk about as well. But the end of it was really just a sense of relief. I landed. It was not an easy flight. It probably shouldn't have happened as well, but I landed. There was a pretty cool screenshot I posted where at the end I got high and I flew out over the LZ area and I did some track riding. I wrote 100 in the fields near the LZ. I used the streets to line things up. And I landed, and it was just a sense of relief. It wasn't even like happiness about being done specifically. It was just like, I did it. I don't have to do any more. And that was the next 2 weeks, essentially. There were some 100K days out there, and I just didn't feel like I really had to fly anymore because the goal wasn't as many as possible. It wasn't to set some record. It was specifically to do 100. If someone else had 110, I wasn't chasing that. I just wanted to do 100 for myself for my reasons, and I had gotten it. And so I didn't really, I flew a couple more days after that. That was the 17th of September. So there were 13 flying days left. And I thought, if the conditions present themselves, I'll do it, but I'm not going to chase for it. But Bassano and St. Andre both had 100K days in the last 10-ish days of the season. And I could have been there, but I didn't have the need to anymore because I accomplished the goal. So mostly it was just a feeling of I got it done, and I got it done. And the 100th flight I'll describe because it was really cool. It ended up actually being one of the only flights that I flew with someone pretty much the whole flight. I went back and looked at my tracks, and I think I had 4 or 5 flights that I flew with someone all day or most of the day. Generally, I was flying by myself because a lot of times in the Alps, there just wasn't anyone else flying, or they were flying little flights. No one was on this stupid 100K mission on any given day. So it was mostly just me flying by myself. Even in like these popular areas like Fish or Spijkboden, there was me on my own little journey. So I didn't have very many flights with people, but number 100 actually ended up being with someone, and that someone was Caliph, who you've had on the show, I think 3 times now. He just happened to be in the area. I bumped into him at one of the local restaurants the night before. I mentioned my thing and how the next day I was going to try to fly 100K, and we said, maybe we try to fly together. Next morning, we take the van up together, and he actually decided he was going to go fly with his friends because it was their last day there. He was like, sorry, I'm sure you've got this 100K. I'm going to go fly with my friends. Have fun. So, okay, I'll go fly by myself. It's what I do. So I launched, and about 15, 20 minutes in, I bumped into Caliph in a thermal. He was by himself. I don't know what happened to his friends, but he saw me, and he just attached himself to me, and we started flying. And are you familiar with Bassano? Have you flown there?
Yeah, I know it well.
So we did the crossing to the east, the Piave Valley, stupid low. People generally go from 1,500 meters, and then you cross and you get there on this wind-blown little hill, pretty low. We ended up going to the end of the Bassano ridgeline before that crossing, chasing a cloud that dissipated right when we got there. And so we ended up so far along the ridge where it's really shallow that we couldn't turn around anymore to go back because we would have bombed out. The only option was to go from 1,000 meters, which is not high, and do the Piave crossing anyway. So we did. We just went woohoo and started crossing. And we arrived really, really low on the other side, climbed up, and it was windy, luckily. And we were able to soar up from very low and kind of establish on the other side. And then we went all the way to the end of the ridge, which is basically the 50K mark right around from launch distance. So then all you have to do is come back. And going out to the east to the end was really, really easy. It was working well. At that point, you're in high terrain. Everything was working well. Beautiful clouds. And we're flying together this whole time. And we turned around and everything fell apart on us. There was suddenly a headwind from kind of the west. The clouds started disappearing on us. There was some sort of wind spilling from the north that was combining with the south, and it was somewhat of a convergence, but it was turbulent and unpleasant. And with all the clouds disappearing and there being a headwind, it was just not fun and difficult. And we made it back to the Piave crossing on the eastern side. And at this point, we're about 70K, 75K flown. And the smart thing to do in terms of 100K would have been to turn around and go back to the east and just turn it into an open distance thing. 50, 25 back, and 25 back again as a zigzag. But it wasn't really pleasant in the east anyway, and so we just decided we're going to go for it. But we couldn't do the standard Piave crossing back because you arrive at that really shallow ridgeline, and we had gone north a ways, and so it would have been more into the wind on that crossing from a low position into a shallow slope with no clouds and a headwind. It just didn't make any sense. And so we did this really scrappy move where we went on a deep line over the Piave into some higher terrain that's behind. We got there extremely low. Caliph, I thought he was going to bomb out. He got this miracle climb that then zoomed past me, and I ended up behind him. And we reestablished onto terrain on the west side of the Piave crossing. So that was successful. But the problem is we were now behind the main Bassano ridgeline, and it was going to be into the wind to get back to the front side where it stops being shallow and becomes the normal kind of rocky mountains there. And we went for this glide. It was super desperate. I got some photos, and we had to punch through the lee of the front ridge. And we're getting closer and closer. It's like, oh, are we going to make it? Are we not going to make it? There's a little bit that you can slough off to the left, but it's all lee. So if you get trapped into it, you might have some vertical component that you can run into, but you're also just getting rotored down as you try to get into it. And we just barely crested some trees and made it onto the front side. And at that point, there was a nice climb, and it was all but guaranteed that we get 100K. Like, we needed one more climb, and we were back. But it was such a cool feeling, and it was really nice to fly with Caliph. It was also quite funny because at some point when we started the return journey and it became windy and turbulent, we were in one of the last climbs that had a cloud above it. And I said something on the radio to the effect of, I generally fly pretty aggressively, but I feel like right now I need to go full defensive mode. Like, this could be the last flight. I need to top out every climb and just do whatever it takes to get the 100K. And Caliph went into full-on XC guide mode. And he starts, we're going to top this out. We're going to take this nice and slow. Nice job. And a couple more times throughout the rest of the flight. He was saying these things as if he was guiding a student. I think he did it completely subconsciously, but it was hilarious because he's telling me, like, good job, as we topped out this really difficult climb and went straight through the lee of something. And he kind of guided me back home in a way, which was really funny on the last flight to have that sort of experience.
Yeah, totally.
And so we were able to make it back to the end. It was really cool that the flight was not a gimme. It was a pretty difficult flight with typical kind of Ariel moves of just go somewhere low and hope it works. And the desperate yeehaw move worked out twice in both directions of the Piave crossing there. We had a little bit of an adventure, but we made it work. And so it was kind of really nice that the last flight was an adventure of its own as well.
Okay, so you're talking about these cool flights, these technical, tricky flights, 98, 99, and 100. What's the most memorable flight from this mission?
So I had a list of memorable flights I was keeping, so I'll share one. I don't know if it was the most memorable, but it was definitely very unique. I think people will be interested to hear about this. For a couple years in beer, flying around here, I had this idea that you could do 100K without ever turning. So no thermaling, no 360s, and no soaring figure eights. Just going along continuous ridge lines and hitting thermals, but not coring them, just taking 50 meters of altitude and continuing on and basically just surfing. And I had tried it a couple times from the Billing launch because it used to be that I would come low across on the way from west to east. I would come below launch and just keep going because the terrain drops down. And so while other people were getting high, they would then have to burn all that altitude for no reason. And I would just go low and connect into the ridge where 360 is and keep going. And then everyone doesn't turn after 360. It's a continuous ridge. You can soar it east and back. Yeah. And so
all the way down to Manti.
To Mandy. Yep. So
yeah, Mandy.
I started having this idea that maybe you could fly 100K without turning. You could go from Beer to Mandy and then back past launch to Big Face using the higher terrain to get to Big Face and then basically glide all the way back. And I had tried it a couple times over the years from Billing launch and it didn't quite work out. But last year, right at the start of the season, like in November, I ended up having a night where I volbived at 360 with a couple people, Matthew being one of them and a couple other guys. And that next day, I realized that I could try the same circuit just from 360 because 360 is right at the place where the ridge is super soarable and it ramps up from there to the west. So I thought I'll go west from 360, take the higher terrain all the way to Big Face and then come back past Billing launch. And if I'm just 100 or 200 meters higher than Billing, that makes the whole transition to the east so much easier. You avoid a lot of low terrain and power lines and canyons and things. And if you could just have a little bit of extra altitude compared to launching at Billing, that transition to 360 should be much easier. And then you've got the rest of the Mandy Ridge and back, which is totally standard fare. So that's exactly what I did. I launched 360 and kind of did a sample run to this place called Train Station, which is a couple kilometers away to make sure it was working. Came back, top landed, and then launched for what became a 100K no turn flight. And it was really, really
cool. That is awesome.
Yeah. So for the record, there were two turns. There was a 180-degree turn in the west, and there was a 180-degree turn in the east to come back. But there was no thermaling 360s. There was no soaring figure eights. I did a lot of curving around every single piece of terrain that stuck out. And sometimes that would involve turning kind of backwards on myself. Like if I was going generally west, but a spine sticks out and I have to face east, that was considered okay because I was following the curvature of a spine. But if I was in some sort of thermal and I turned 90 degrees out to maximize lift. I couldn't turn more than 90 degrees. I set a rule for myself that I couldn't like go back on my direction of travel. I had to keep going.
So satisfying.
And there were a couple really, really close moments at the start, close in terms of making it through or around things and not clearing them. At the very start, in that first couple minutes going to the train station point, I came in just a little bit low. And if you're above train station, you get onto this rapidly rising terrain and things are really easy and continuous. But I came in below train station. And so I had to dive deep into this valley. I decided to commit to it anyway. And so I went in deep and then I had to soar around every single piece of terrain that was there for the next 10 kilometers. Whereas if I just had maybe 50 meters more at train station, I could have done that 10 kilometers in one continuous, basically straight line instead of wrapping around every spine. So that was quite difficult. And then coming back from Big Face, my western turn point, I went to the area of Golf Course, which is pretty close to the Billing launch. And I didn't want to wrap all the way around Golf Course, which was a pretty long ridgeline. So I went deep behind it and I just barely shot through this col. The harness is basically on the ground and that allowed me to keep my altitude and make it past Billing launch with just the 100 or 200 meters that I needed that I thought would make this easier. And sure enough, at that point, it was smooth sailing all the way back to train station area where it becomes continuous to 360 to Mandy and back. And when I was coming back, the big focus became, I want to top land in the exact spot where I launched at 360, and I want to do it perfectly on the first time so that I don't have to abort the launch and do some sort of weird soaring, because that would destroy the whole sanctity of the no turn 100K. And I came into 360 with exactly the amount of altitude I needed. I was maybe like 10 meters higher than the launch. So I just kind of curved in behind the ridge and figured out where I needed to be so that I would descend the 10 meters into the wind and not get lifted up and not come short. And I landed exactly where I took off at 360. And it was 100-point something triangle. It was very, very satisfying.
Oh man, that is very sexy.
I'll send you that track log and you can look at it and you can see every little curvature I had to do.
See that.
Yeah.
I'd love to see that. What a cool mission. While you were doing this, you talked about some of the, the dark times, the hard times, difficult times. Was there anything outside of the numbers that kept you going? You had this 100, but was there anything, did you ever have to reach to something else?
So definitely the prime motivation to keep going was the numbers aspect, as you said, just chasing that and okay, +1, that gets me incrementally closer to 100. It was really nice. I had a few very, very supportive friends that were always encouraging me, listening to my ranting and complaining and despair about the state of the weather and the numbers and stuff. In particular, there is a very wonderful Austrian pilot named Seppel. Seppel is actually number 2 in the Club 100K stats for the XContest season. He did 66 of them. And of course, his are without top landing. So we can say that he is the rightful winner of Club 100K as far as continuous flights. And he was my number 1 supporter. It was really, really cool. I flew with him a few times because he was in India as well. We had a really cool flight one day where he was working on a project of 50 100K flights in the year 2024 because it was his 50th year of flying. And I got to fly with him and another friend of ours that day, which was really special for him. And then we saw each other in Colombia. When I was in the Alps, he invited me to visit him in Austria. He lives in a really cool spot west of Innsbruck. And he flies a lot there. He had a ton of 100Ks in March and April. And the idea was I was going to spend the month of July at his house flying 100K with him as much as possible. There was even an idea that we would do one on tandem together, which would have been super fun. But right when I got to his house, we got one good day together. We got 100K. And then the weather just went completely south and he had to stay there. And he was like, come on, you should go wherever the weather is good. You got this. And so he was extremely supportive in talking about weather and ideas with me and just generally being a real cheerleader, which was super awesome. Seppel is an amazing guy, an amazing pilot, very cool character. And I was super lucky to have him on my side. And I had a couple other friends that were similarly very encouraging, looking at weather for me because I'm not really into weather. I just kind of hope for the best and that I'll go fly whatever days are flyable. But I had some people that were kind of going, oh, you should maybe drive a couple hours to this spot. It looks good for 2 days, or just supporting me and going, you got this. It's okay. And encouraging me to continue. So that was really, really nice to have.
I do want to hear about your gear. I saw you flew the Climber, the Arctic, and the Peak 6. Is that right?
Yep. So I started the year with a Peak 6, pretty much brand new. I got it in early September of last year. I had just a couple flights on it in the Alps, and I got to Beer, and my brand new glider was exposed to the dirt and dust and rocks of Beer and flying in India and top landing and camping and stuff. So that Peak was my main glider for most of the year, about 9 months worth. I got 5,600K flights on that. I have this in my spreadsheet, of course. So 56 on the Peak 6. I also had a Climber 2P. That is my backup glider because it's so light that I can afford to have it as a second glider to travel with. I got it really intending not to fly a lot on, but just to have as a backup glider that is in good condition, 2-liner, performance, all of that, but not to use, only in case of something happening, like, I don't know, going in a tree and having to get your main glider repaired for a couple of days, that sort of thing. And so the backup glider got put in the game a couple times, in fact, 15 times total over the year. And then towards the end of the year, the Arctic R2 came out, and I had originally flown the Arctic R original before the Peak. And so I was pretty keen on that glider. So I got that in June, late June. So I flew it for like the last 3 months of the season and the project. And so that glider had 29 flights on it. It's now about 3 months old, a little bit more, and has close to 300 hours on it. So it's no longer a new glider, even though it's my new glider. And then and then my harness. My harness is the Woody Valley GTO Lite 2. This is my third one of that harness because my first one had about 1,200 hours, and then I got a second one, and that one also had about 1,200 hours. And then earlier in the summer, I got a third one of the GTO Lite 2. And shortly after, my little Powerline escapade ended up with that harness being ripped, and it was already it was quite old with 1,200 hours on it. It didn't look that good. There was a lot of things that just... It was nice to get into a new harness anyway. So now I've been flying on my new, which also now has a couple hundred hours harness as my gear.
You should definitely become a test pilot. We need you on the team just for that aspect. Ariel, that was amazing. What a project. Hats off to you, man. That's really incredible. I'm with you. I kind of feel like the Alaska thing probably won't be repeated. I doubt yours will either. And but a hell of a mission, man. To take it from 52 to 100 is impressive. I don't think Matthew is too keen on chasing that either. So you've got a safe record for a while. But thanks for sharing all that with us. And I wish you well this year in Beer. Hope you get some great flights and figure out your next moves. I think that'll be interesting.
Thank you. Oh yeah, it was a really interesting year, I will say, and I wanted to share that with people because I think if you tell most people, oh yeah, I fly full time 900 hours of XC for a year, most people would be like, that's so cool. I wish I could do that. And I think the answer to that is nuanced. That it's not that great. There are downsides to it, and I wanted to share the triumphs, but also the trials and tribulations of what it's like to fly intensively for a year and everything that comes with that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a lot like record chasing. It becomes a job. You know, there's a lot of, big distance chasing, but record chasing switches very quickly from this is fun to this is a job. Yeah, and it sounded like a lot of that was a job.
Definitely.
But an impressive one nonetheless. Appreciate you, man. Thanks for coming on the show, and it's good to see your face, and can't wait to see you somewhere at Cloudbase.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
If you find the Cloud-Based Mayhem valuable, you can support it in a lot of different ways. You can give us a rating on iTunes or Stitcher, or however you get your podcast. That goes a long ways and helps spread the word. You can blog about it on your own website or share it on social media. You can talk about it on the way up to launch with your pilot friends. I know a lot of interesting conversations have happened that way. And of course, you can support us financially. This show does take a lot of time, a lot of editing, a lot of storage and music and all kinds of behind the scenes cost. So if you can support us financially, all we've ever asked for is $1 a show. And you can do that through a one-time donation through PayPal, or you can set up a subscription service that charges you for each show that comes out. We put a new show out every 2 weeks. So, for example, if you did $1 a show and every 2 weeks, it'd be about $25 a year. So way cheaper than a magazine subscription, and it makes all of this possible. I do not want to fund this show with advertising or sponsors. We get asked about that pretty frequently, but for a whole bunch of different reasons, which I've said many times on the show, I don't want to do that. I don't like having that stuff at the front of the show. And I also want you to know that these are authentic conversations with real people, and these are just our opinions, but our opinions are not being skewed by sponsors or advertising dollars. I think that's a pretty toxic business model. So I hope you dig that. You can support us. If you go to cloudbasedmayhem.com, you can find the places to support. You can do it through patreon.com/cloudbasedmayhem. If you want a recurring subscription, you can also do that directly through the website. We've tried to make it really easy, and that will give you access to all the bonus material, little video casts that we do, and extra little nuggets that we find in conversations that don't make it into the main show, but we feel like you should hear. We don't put any of that behind a paywall. If you can't afford to support us, then just let me know and I'll set you up with an account. Of course, that'll be lifetime, and hopefully you're being in a position someday to be able to support us. But you'll find all that on the website. All of you who have supported us or even joined our newsletter or bought Cloud-Based Mayhem merchandise, t-shirts or hats or anything, you should be all set up. You should have an account, and you should be able to access all that bonus material now. Thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate your support, and we'll see you on the next show. Thank you.